Here's a number that sounds like a typo: $10. That's roughly what it costs to fully charge a certified 4-seat electric aircraft and fly it for close to an hour. A Cessna 182, the workhorse of American flight schools for decades, burns somewhere between $100 and $250 in fuel for that same hour in the air. This isn't a concept aircraft or a science project. It's already certified, already flying paying passengers, and it's already breaking the business model an entire industry was built on. This is the RX-4E, developed by the Liaoning General Aviation Academy in China. And unlike a lot of headline-grabbing electric aviation projects that never leave the prototype stage, this one has actually done the hardest part, getting a government aviation authority to sign off on it as safe to fly commercially. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how the economics work, why well-funded American competitors are still stuck on the ground, and where this aircraft genuinely can't compete, because that part matters too. The Liaoning General Aviation Academy has been quietly building toward this moment since 2015, developing electric aircraft prototypes years before electric aviation was a phrase most people outside the industry had ever heard. The RX-4E itself first took flight as a prototype back in October of 2019. It spent the following 5 years going through flight testing, design refinement, and the single hardest part of the entire process: certification. On December 29, 2024, Chinese aviation regulators formally certified the RX-4E as airworthy for passenger flight. That date matters, because it's the moment this stopped being an experiment and became a commercial product. To understand why a $10 flight is even physically possible, you have to start with the core problem every electric aircraft engineer is fighting against: energy density. Gasoline packs roughly 40 times more usable energy per kilogram than the best batteries currently flying. That single physical fact is the entire reason electric aviation has lagged decades behind electric cars. A car can carry extra battery weight and just accept a shorter range. An aircraft has to get off the ground first, which makes every extra pound of battery weight a direct trade against how much the plane can even lift. The RX-4E's answer to that problem is aerodynamic, not just electrical. It uses long, low-drag wings specifically shaped to squeeze maximum lift out of every unit of energy on board, paired with an electric motor rated at around 92% efficiency. For comparison, a traditional piston aircraft engine, the kind powering a Cessna, typically converts only 25 to 30% of its fuel energy into actual forward thrust. The rest is lost as heat and noise. In other words, even before you account for the price difference between electricity and avgas, the RX-4E is simply wasting far less energy to begin with. Then there's the part that actually makes this practical for a working flight school, instead of just an engineering demonstration: battery swapping. Instead of waiting around for a slow recharge, ground crews can physically swap a depleted battery pack for a charged one in about 3 minutes. That's faster than most people spend filling a car with gas, let alone refueling an aircraft. Run the actual numbers, and the gap is hard to overstate. A full charge costs somewhere around $10, all-in operating cost, including maintenance and battery wear, lands somewhere around $40 to $60 per flight hour. A Cessna 182 doing the same flying costs somewhere between $150 and $250 per hour once you include fuel and the ongoing wear on a combustion engine. For a flight school running 5 aircraft, 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, that gap isn't a rounding error. It's a 6-figure difference in annual operating costs, and that's before you even factor in engine overhauls. There's a training benefit here too that's easy to overlook. Electric powertrains are mechanically simpler than piston engines. No mixture control, no carburetor icing to watch for, no engine leaning procedures to teach a nervous student pilot on their first solo flight. For flight instructors, that simplicity means less time spent teaching engine management and more time spent teaching actual flying. It's a small detail, but across thousands of training hours a year, it adds up to real instructional efficiency. And that cost advantage isn't limited to fuel versus electricity. It's why some American aviation investors, watching this unfold from thousands of miles away, are quietly asking whether their own multi-hundred-million-dollar electric aviation bets are actually solving the right problem. Here's the part that should genuinely frustrate anyone rooting for American aviation companies. The engineering problem was never really the bottleneck. Companies like Beta Technologies and Bi Aerospace, both based in the United States, have been building genuinely capable electric aircraft for years, backed by hundreds of millions of dollars in venture funding. Their designs are not inferior. What's held them back is a regulatory environment that, until very recently, had almost no established framework for certifying electric propulsion in aircraft at all. The Federal Aviation Administration has historically built its certification processes around combustion engines that have been understood for the better part of a century. Electric propulsion is comparatively new territory, and building a rigorous, safe certification pathway from scratch takes years, sometimes closer to a decade, even when the underlying aircraft is ready to fly. That's not incompetence. Aviation safety regulation is deliberately, appropriately slow, because the cost of getting it wrong is measured in lives, not dollars. But slow and safe on one side of the Pacific, combined with a government aviation authority willing to move faster on the other side, means the same underlying engineering problem gets solved on two very different timelines. To put the scale of that funding gap in perspective, Beta Technologies alone has raised well over $1 billion from investors betting on electric aviation. Bi Aerospace has raised smaller but still substantial venture rounds toward the same goal. Both companies have flying prototypes with genuinely impressive engineering behind them. Neither has a fully certified, commercially available aircraft on the market yet. Meanwhile, a Chinese aviation academy with a fraction of that funding got there first, not because the engineering was easier, but because the regulatory finish line was closer. If a 5-year-old certified aircraft can already do something most American electric aviation companies are still years away from bringing to market, it's worth understanding exactly where the gap actually is. Hit subscribe because that gap is bigger than most people realize, and it isn't where you'd expect. Range is where this aircraft's limitations become impossible to ignore, and it's important not to bury this the way some coverage of the RX-4E does. The RX-4E has a range of roughly 162 nautical miles. A Cessna 182 can cover close to 1,000 nautical miles on a single tank. That's not a small gap. It's the difference between a short regional hop and an actual cross-country flight. If your mission profile involves flying from one coast to the other, or covering long distances between rural airports, this aircraft simply cannot do that job today, and no amount of battery swapping changes that fundamental physics problem. But here's the context that gap needs. The vast majority of small aircraft flight hours in the United States aren't cross-country trips at all. They're flight training, touch-and-go landings, pattern work, short instructional flights that rarely exceed an hour and almost never leave a 50-mile radius of the home airport. For that specific, enormous slice of the small aircraft market, a 162-mile range isn't really a limitation at all. It's simply irrelevant to the mission. The purchase price tells a similar story of a very specific use case rather than a universal replacement. The RX-4E costs somewhere around $600,000, which is roughly in line with a comparably equipped Cessna 182. So the sticker price isn't actually the selling point here. The ongoing cost of flying it is. Battery packs need periodic replacement, typically every 2 to 4 years, running somewhere around $10,000 to $14,000. Compare that to a traditional piston engine overhaul, which usually runs $30,000 to $50,000 on a similar replacement cycle. Even the maintenance curve favors the electric platform. There's also a manufacturing advantage here that mirrors something happening across multiple Chinese industries right now, not just aviation. Electric motors, battery cells, and battery management systems, developed at massive scale for China's electric vehicle industry, are increasingly being adapted into other applications, electric aircraft being one of the more surprising examples. The RX-4E isn't sourcing exotic, low-volume aerospace-grade batteries built from scratch. It's benefiting from battery technology that's already been refined and mass-produced by the millions for cars, which helps explain both the cost and the relatively fast pace of iteration. Put those two limitations and that manufacturing advantage together, and a clear picture emerges. This isn't a Cessna replacement for cross-country pilots. It's a purpose-built tool for exactly one job, flight training and short regional hops. And for that specific job, the operating economics are difficult to argue with. There's a quieter benefit to this aircraft that rarely makes it into the spec sheet, literally quieter. Electric motors produce a fraction of the noise of a piston engine, which matters enormously for flight schools operating out of airports near residential neighborhoods where noise complaints have shut down training programs before. A flight school that can run more daily circuits without drawing noise complaints from nearby homeowners isn't just saving money on fuel, it's protecting its ability to keep operating at all. Insurance and total cost of ownership tell a similar story once you add everything up over a 5-year period. Fewer moving parts in an electric motor generally means fewer mechanical failure points, which insurers increasingly factor into premiums for electric ground vehicles already. As electric aircraft accumulate a real-world safety and reliability track record, that same pricing logic is expected to extend to aviation insurance as well, though that data is still relatively early for a platform only certified since the end of 2024. So what actually broke here? Not the plane's ability to fly long distances, it genuinely can't, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. What broke is the assumption that owning and operating a small aircraft has to mean accepting 6-figure annual fuel and maintenance costs as simply the price of admission. For the flight schools and regional operators whose entire business runs on short hops and repetitive circuits, that old math no longer holds, and the operators who figure that out first are the ones who stand to benefit the most. What happens next is the part worth watching. If a program like this keeps iterating at the pace it has since 2019, moving from prototype to full certification in 5 years, it's reasonable to expect larger electric airframes and longer-range variants built on the same battery swap approach within the next several years. If that range gap starts closing even modestly over time, the argument for sticking with a piston-powered fleet gets harder to make with every passing flight training season.